thanks for stopping in. So today we're talking about embossing, particularly greeting cards. So I had a friend ask me, could I make a video to show how I emboss my greeting cards? So that's what this video is for. I'm going to give you a quick list of things that we'll be using, tools and supplies, so that you'll have an idea of what all it takes to emboss. So I'm going to cover a couple of details before we get started. First off, of course, you're going to need paper. So we're going to use this card base to represent our paper. This card base I made for one of the cards I'll be completing in this project. As we get started with the embossing, I'll explain more about card bases. Also, you're going to need an image, and that image is coming from a stamp. This is my stamp that I bought last year from Michael's. I love this stamp. It's my favorite Christmas stamp. I couldn't resist bringing it back out again this year. One of the reasons I really like this stamp is because of its sheer size. It makes it very easy to make a very nice card without having to add a lot of embellishments. Then also you'll need ink. So this is Versamark ink. There are a lot of different inks on the market for embossing. I personally use this one. I've not used a different one, but I know this one works very, very well. You'll also need a powder tool. This is a powder bag. I found it at Michael's. And this is going to help take the static off of your paper so that your embossing powder doesn't stick to all the surface. And I'll explain more about that as we get into this process. Then, of course, you'll need your embossing powder. So I don't think I'm using this embossing powder in this video, but the reason I pulled it out of my stash is so that you would see a powder that I have found in a lot of stores locally. So if you have craft stores near you, more than likely I would think that they would have Ranger embossing powder. So I wanted you to know what it looks like if you went in the store to look for it. And also to let you know, this is a gold that I use a lot. And another helpful tip to know, embossing powder goes a long way. This container I've had over a year, and I want to say it's about 85% still full. So it doesn't take a lot of embossing powder, and it lasts a while. Also, if you are someone who does not do well with stamping, or you've tried it and it didn't work out so great, I would encourage you to buy a stamp positioning tool. This is not a necessity, but yet it is a necessity for me. So the reason I would suggest a stamp positioning tool is because this tool makes it so that you can put your stamp on this door. And I'll explain what's going on with this stamp, because if you're familiar with stamps, I know you're looking at my stamp like, what's going on with that? This stamp was attached to a wooden block. This is a rubber stamp. And the rubber stamps are usually attached to wooden blocks, or they have some type of cling material on the back that would help you stick it to an acrylic block, which is how you would traditionally see people stamp things. I took off the wooden block so I could use it in this stamp positioner. Now, there is a type of foam backing that you can add to rubber stamps to turn them into cling stamps. I was being cheap. Let me just be honest and tell you I was being cheap. I didn't want to be patient. And I just take tape and roll the tape up and make it so it's sticky on both sides and stick it on the back of this. And you'll see that shortly. And I just stick it to this door. That's how I do it. At some point, I will mount this like it should properly be mounted. But right now is not that time. So that's why I took the wooden back off of this stamp. And usually what I'll do is put it on the back of this door and make the impression. The great thing about this is you can then re-ink it and push it down again and not worry that you won't put the stamp in the exact position that it was before. This helps make stamping super easy, and it took out so much frustration from my process. I would have given up stamping if I had not bought this tool. Like I said before, this tool, this tool has been taken off the market. This one was by Hampton Art, but I know there is one made by Misty that looks almost exactly like this. It's just pink. And I believe the reason that this one came off the market is because it was a little bit of a patent infringement going on. So the Misty looks just like this except for it's pink, or this looks like the Misty. And Tim Holtz makes one too. I think that's the one I'm going to buy next because it has a bigger working surface. So that's a helpful tip for you. Another helpful tip is coffee filters. I know you're like, coffee filters? Really? Yes, coffee filters. The same coffee filter that you would put in your coffee maker. So this is used to catch excess embossing powder. And I'll show you how I use that later. This tip I got from Christina Werner, who is an awesome card maker. I suggest you go hop over to her channel quickly. And the last tool you will need is a heat embossing tool. And that heat embossing tool I purchased from Hobby Lobby, but you can also get them from, of course, Joann's, Michael's. I think Paper Source has one too that's in a pretty teal color. I'm sure I'll eventually get to that. And then a lot of other card makers I know, I believe, use a Hero Arts heat tool, and it's black. So just be on the lookout. Any craft supply store should have a heat tool. Please know that a blow dryer or hair dryer is not going to work for this project. I wouldn't suggest you use that. I wanted to help my friends out and not overwhelm them. And then I also wanted to provide an option for those who are more familiar with card making. So this is what we're going to do. I was in Michael's a couple of weeks ago, and I ran across this pack of cards and envelopes. And I love that they had a great kind of like pearl iridescent sheen to them. It's hard to see it on the camera, especially in this clear bag, but they have a very nice sheen to them. And I bought them because I had another project I had been working on with vellum, and I thought they would be great for it. But little did I know I was going to end up using it for Christmas too. And then this is a watercolor background I made over a year ago. So I have a book, this is the book, full of different things I've painted, watercolor projects, ink projects, when I was very much intimidated by actual pans of paint or either palettes of paint. I started out with watercolor pencils, and these are the watercolor pencils I use to make this background. And so to show you the watercolors, how they look, this is how they look, and they're a little dull, some of them, because I use them a lot. And this is what I use to make this card base, and I've had it, like I said, since November, December. So that's how I started with my watercolor journey, because I was so scared to use the tubes of watercolor or to use the pans of watercolors. So I just went rifling through that little black book and found this and thought this would be great to show you a card from scratch. So let's say you made a abstract design either using ink or watercolor or acrylic, and you cut it down, and that's going to be the backdrop for your card. Or you didn't want to do all of that, you're not a painter, you don't want to sit down and get brushes and all of that together, you go and get a card base from the store that's already made. We can start from scratch, we can start from pre-made. Now, like I said, I bought this card a couple of weeks ago for another project. I went in Michael's the other day to get something for this project and ran across this size of the same card set. I bought this because this is a better size. I had thought I was going to trim this down. I saw this and I said, look at there, blessings in disguise. So we're going to use this size. So this is the pre-bought card. Has a matching envelope to go with it. And then this is the watercolor piece that I'm using as a background for the card that we're making from scratch. Now, because there is nothing attached to this card, I made a card base to adhere it to, and this is the card base. And so when we finish embossing on the watercolor piece, we're going to attach it to the card base, and that's going to make our card. Now, also, I oftentimes make my own envelope, and so I made an envelope for this card out of the same paper I used to make the card base, so it matches perfectly. I could have pre-bought a white envelope or colored envelope to match this, and that'd have been fine, but I'm trying to stay true to how I make cards. So I usually make my own envelope. Okay, and we're back. So let's get started. This is the stamp positioning tool again, as I said earlier. Good thing to know about these, they are magnetic. Most of the ones that I've seen are all magnetic, and the magnet comes into play for paper security. Helps keep the paper in its position, and also so that when you stamp down on the paper and lift the stamp back up, the paper doesn't come up with the stamp. Also, this particular stamp positioner came with a foam insert. This is used in case we're using the clear polymer stamps. They don't need as much depth to make contact with the paper. So this can be put in or taken out depending on what type of stamp you're using. Because my little Christmas tree stamp is kind of thick, we're not going to use it because it'll meet the paper without needing the extra lift from the foam. The great thing about the door on this stamp positioner is that it has grids, and so I'm going to put the foam piece behind the door so that you can see the grids. And with this rubber stamp, I use tape, and I just use the masking tape that I use when I'm doing watercolor pieces to help tape the paper down to a board while I paint. So I just take this tape because it comes up without any residue, and I just roll it old school style, and I put it behind the stamp like so. It's not really I guess the proper way to do it, but it's the way I do it. Just all I need is for it to stay on the screen. And so I'm just gonna level this where I think it might be even, and then I just push the stamp down so that it'll stay on the board, and it doesn't look like it's even. I'm gonna try that again. I'm eyeballing it. So the thing is, I'm looking at this bottom lettering to kind of make sure I'm doing it the right way, because I've learned last year using this stamp, I can't go by just the style of the tree, because the way the words are, the words will tell if it's level or not. So can't go by the tree shape, you gotta go by the lettering on the tree. I think that's good enough for today. I'm not going to stress out about it. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with our note card base. So I have taken this card and shifted it a little bit, and I pushed it over to meet one of the lines on the grid. So that helps me determine that it should be lined up properly. Okay, now comes the part where you need your powder. So the reason that we powder the surface that we're going to get ready to stamp is because when we put the embossing powder down, we don't want it to stick to anything other than the stamped area. And because static will build up, and because it's a very finely milled powder, it will stick to other parts of the card. When you apply the heat, those parts that are just randomly scattered around the card will turn into melted embossing powder, and they'll end up being stuck permanently to the card. So the way to avoid that is to powder the surface liberally so that you don't get any powder scattered places you don't want it. So it's got powder everywhere. I'm a little heavy-handed with my powder. Usually I do this outside of this stamp positioning tool, but since I've gone through so much trouble to put that paper in there right, I'm not going to take it back out. Okay, so the next step is to ink the stamp, and again we're using that Versamark ink, and what we're going to do is just stamp the ink like you would regularly stamp it. The deal with the Versamark ink is that it's a clear, sticky, very sticky ink. And this is what's going to cause the powder to stick to this image. Now, you'll be able to see it when you stamp the paper. And then this is going to help determine if we got a good impression or not. Okay, so this is when we close the door and we press down to make sure we're making a really good impression. And then we lift it up. And you can't see it on the camera, but I'm looking at it and I'm not okay with the impression that I have. So I'm going to stamp it again. Because what you don't want to do is pour the powder on it and realize that you did not get a good impression. So we're going to stamp it again. Make sure we cover all the spots. And also, because I have taped the stamp onto the board, I also want to make sure I press down in all the areas to make sure that the stamp is meeting the paper. Lift it up, and then I'm going to look at it at an angle and maybe one more stamp, and I think I'll feel okay about it. Also, this is not a new Versamark pad. I've had this for almost a year, I think, and I haven't re-inked it, and I haven't bought a new one, so sometimes I have to use it 1 or 2 times to get a good impression. But you can buy re-inking bottles for this, or you can just buy a new pad. That's not super expensive. Okay, I think that's a good coating. I'll try to lift it so you can see what I mean. See, you have a slight watermark look to it. So that's sticky, and we're gonna move on to the next process. Also, sometimes, because I can be a bit of a neat person, even when I'm trying to craft, I use baby wipes to clean off my area or my stamps, just because I don't like ink to stay until I can really get them to a sink and wash everything properly. But because I'll be doing some other things, I just go ahead and do a little small wipe and a paper towel to kind of, because I'm going to use this stamp again, I'm going to leave it right here because we're going to use it for the watercolored background. But I want to make sure I clean it off very, very, very well, because as I try to lay it on top of that and position it, I don't want any of the residue from that first stamp to get on the paper, because it will mess up my embossing. I'm going to set this aside. Okay, so the embossing powder that I've decided to use is a new brand. I haven't used this the first time. We're using it together for the first time. It's from Recollections, which is Michael's brand, and it's a copper color, and I thought it would look really good with this colored background. So we're going to take our coffee filters, and I use them as a catch-all for using embossing powder. I tap my lids to try to make sure if any excessive powder is at the top, it falls back into the jar. And then what we're going to do is take the embossing powder and sprinkle it over the area that we have stamped. You can be liberal with this. I'm probably a lot more liberal with it than I should be, but it's going to all get put back in the jar, so I'm not really worried about it. And then, because we have powdered our surface, we will shake off the excess, and I'll tap it a couple of times lightly to get the excess off. And this is why we powder it, so that we can get all the excess off. And voila. Did really, really good. Now, a little note, there's a couple of pieces of embossing powder that are scattered over here. Gonna show you what I do to get that off. Okay, to get the excessive powder off, what I do is just grab my watercolor brushes, or these are my paint brushes. I use them for watercoloring. I have different sizes, and I'll just find one that looks like it'll work really well. I usually use this one and this flat one to help wipe off excess powder. So if you just see some, you just brush it off to help clean up your card. So when you put the heat gun on there and melt it, it doesn't melt on your card. And then you can get a smaller brush to get the finer areas and clean those up. I've never embossed on this type of card before, and so it's really important to put that powder down so that you don't get a static effect. Okay. All right, so that has cleaned that up, and as you can see, the impression worked really well. The embossing powder has stuck to the entire image, and it looks good and looks clean. So what I normally do is take our lovely coffee filter and pull all of the powder in the bottom of the filter and bend it, and you can tell I've used these a lot. I've gotten a nice little crease going in it. Then I crease it and I use it to put the powder back in the jar. Waste not, want not. And there you have it. Easy peasy. I'll just take this excess and put it in the trash. But that's how I end up being able to save most of my embossing powder. And then we put the top back on and we're good till the next use. Okay, and now we can move on to the next part. So we're going to put up the paper filters, and then we're going to bring our card face over here. And then the next thing we're going to use is our heat tool. And what I like to do is turn on the heat tool and let it get warm. And then, because it's loud, I'm going to go ahead and say this. I then will lightly hold it to the card, and you'll be able to see the transition of the powder as it melts and gives you that embossed effect. And then you'll be able to eyeball it until when you've melted all of it, and then you'll just turn off the heat gun. So here we go. And it heats up pretty fast. Like it's very hot. Okay, very hot now. I'll try to hold this at an angle so that you can see it melting. Have one little spot right there. All right. I believe all of it is melted. Ooh, I really like this copper. Okay, so now you can see it's nice and smooth and it dries instantly. I have one little spot right there that's not as smooth as I would like it. Perfect. Okay. So while it's still warm, I make sure that my paper is not bent or warped before it cools off. Okay. I had to move the paper a little bit more than normal because the card space is being used almost totally. So that is hot, and so I had to keep moving it around so I didn't burn my finger. But as you can see, I can rub my hand over this now and nothing's coming off, and has a gorgeous shine, if you can see right there. Very, very nice. And so that is how to emboss. Now, because I have a couple of things in my craft storage, I decided I wanted to add a little something extra to this card. And so I went and found these little pearls that I bought, again, the reason that they match so well is because I bought them to finish the other project I mentioned earlier in the video. And I thought, well, I could still use them for this project as well. So we're going to take these pearls out, and we're going to use probably this mid-size one and space them out around the card. Maybe put 3 on here to add a little something extra just to finish it. I think what I'm thinking is maybe a cluster here and 1 or 2 here, but I'm not sure how I feel about that. Or, ooh, you know what? Maybe. Now, this is the part of how I work. This is how I sit here and debate about things. I could put this here in the center of the star. Why not? Let's just go with it. And then maybe fill in the gaps in the tree with these. Okay, let's get started on the second card. So we have our watercolor piece, and we're going to put it down on our stamp positioner, probably in the same area I had the last card. Let me see if this looks pretty okay. Yeah, that'll work. I'll move the magnet out some more. I think since this side seems like it wants to turn, we'll put the magnet over there. I think that'll work. Okay, so same as the last time, we're going to powder our piece of watercolor, and I'm going to take this out and powder it really, really good. So I don't have to do any of that. Just trying to take the static off the paper. Like I said, I can be very heavy-handed with the powder part. But I don't want to have any issues with sticking. Yep, that'll work. Okay, so like last time, we'll also be taking the Versamark ink and inking the stamp really well so that we get a good impression on the cards. And I'm gonna press down. Same as last time. Watercolor paper is not really smooth. You can get watercolor paper that's smooth, but the one I use has texture to it. So to make sure that you're getting that ink really into the paper evenly, you might want to press a little bit more firmly to make sure that you're getting a good impression. And again, if I'm looking at it from an angle, I can tell that I did pretty good with that impression. I want to add some more ink so that we get a really good impression. And so with the note card, we could put another note card down easily if it didn't get a really good impression. But because this is something I watercolored, I don't think I have another piece of this in that black book. So I think we want to make sure that we get this impression really, really good, because if you've spent time doing watercolor or making an ink blended background or what have you, you want to make sure that you don't ruin it. Now, say you do put the Versamark ink down and it's not covered properly, and you go to put your powder on it and it doesn't work out the way you thought it would, you can dust off the powder with a brush and then let the Versamark ink dry and attempt to do it again. The only thing about that is it is a watermark stamp, so sometimes it still might leave a shadow of the originally stamped image. So like I said, you really want to make sure you get it right the first time, especially if it's a background that you don't know if you have more of. Okay, I'm going to stamp this one more time because I'm not sure if the hope at the bottom or the L on the outside got enough ink on it. So I'm going to stamp this one more time for good measure and press down on the sides because I want to make sure it gets inked up really good. I think that'll do it. Okay, and like before, I take my magnet off and remove my watercolor piece, and then I also take a baby wipe and try to take off that sticky ink off my stamp. I'll then wash it in the sink with some warm water when I finish embossing, and I'll clean off the powder on my stamp positioning tool. For this piece, I picked up another Recollections embossing powder while I was out because I did again have a embossing powder color that I wanted to put on top of this. I'm still not sure about this. I've never had one with flecks of sparkle as big as the ones that are in this jar. I don't know how this is going to work out. We're going to do it together. So I'm going to get my coffee filters and put this on top of that. And then I'm going to tap that. And as you can see, it's got these flecks of sparkles in it. So we're going to pour a generous amount on top. This is a totally different color scheme for Christmas. That's one reason I picked it, because I don't think I've ever done any type of Christmas card aside from, I think I did some snowmen last year that might have had some kind of bright colors on them, but this is really different for me. And so we're going to see if we got a good impression. This is kind of like a fun part for me. It's like sifting. And I think it did pretty good. Okay. So we don't have any pieces missing. So I'm going to give it a good tap to try to get the excessive. Oh yeah, that turned out great. Okay. So again, we did another great impression. Embossing powder is sticking everywhere it needs to. You see the difference between me being really liberal with the powder. I don't have to dust anything off of this from what I can tell. Okay, so we're going to take our powder and put it back in the jar. Really interested to see how this melts. Never used Recollections. These are the first times I'm using Recollection. I really like how that copper turned out. I mean, really like that copper. I'll be using it some more. All right, I can put this up and get the heat tool. Okay, so like last time, we're going to get the heat gun and we're going to turn it on. Okay, it's hot enough. Okay. One thing I can tell you with this really sparkly heat embossing, it's hard to tell when you've melted the powder. So I'm looking now to make sure that I've melted the powder, because as I was heating, it was hard to see the change in the powder. Now that I'm looking at it up close, I can tell that it's changed, and that it's turned smooth. So that's one way you'll know that it has melted. It'll stop looking grainy and it'll turn smooth. This did not transition like the copper one did. So I now know when I deal with sparkle to make sure that I pay close attention to make sure that it's melted. From what I can see up close though, it has melted. It's got an awesome look to it though, if you can tell up close. It's quite nice. Just want to double check and make sure that I don't have any parts, and so I'm going to hit one time more with the heat tool just to make sure. Okay, I believe it's melted. Okay, very nice, very, very nice. That color goes very well with that background. Okay, so another card we have heat embossed, and now because this was the card we were doing from scratch, we're going to have to adhere it to its back, which is this. And so pretty much I've already pre-cut it to fit on here properly. And the other reason that I put this on after I finish working with the card is because once I put the adhesive on, it will help take any type of buckle or puckle or anything, wrinkle out of this paper. Sometimes when you're embossing, the paper wants to warp, and so if you're gluing it down after, it'll help make it flatten out again. So that is a good fit for this card, I believe. I kind of eyeballed it when I cut it. Okay, yeah, it's good. All right, so pretty much I use Tombow runner tape. I use the permanent one that's blue. I use the dots, which is pink. And I also use the repositionable one, which is green. A lot of times when I just want to put something down in my planner and take it back up, I'll use the repositionable tape. But this is the permanent tape. The Tombow Adhesive Extreme Runner, it's red. It's really good. I don't know. I always end up messing it up. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with it, but I end up causing problems. So I'm just going to run this along the side and then paste it down. And then I'm going to turn it and do the same on the other side. I just get really wild with the tape. Because the watercolor paper is thick, so I just want to make sure we've got enough adhesive down to hold it. Okay, I'm always wiping. I like to keep my work area clean. Okay, I think that'll do it. Okay, so we've put it on its card base, and now it's one whole card, and it will stand up. If we send it to someone, they can put it with their Christmas cards. Okay, the other thing I think I'm going to do, I might add a little something to this one too. I had some sequins or some flat confetti disc that I use for another project. And what do you think? I think these will go really well with it. So I think I'm going to take a couple of these and put them on the side. Got a little static going on here. There we go. These I ordered from online from Studio Katia by way of Simon Says Stamp, which is a good craft supplier store. If you can't find something at Amazon, a lot of times they have things exclusive to their site. A lot of stamp designs that are exclusive to them. I've ordered from them before, and I tend to find what I'm looking for craft-wise from them. If I can't find it anywhere else, they normally will have it. They're like a crafter haven. Okay. Let's see. We turn it. Put those there. Maybe put another one, small one. You're hanging out. You must want to be on the card. Okay, I want them to reflect. Right. Okay, so I'm going to glue these down. But if you could see the way that they reflect off, this card is perfect. Gives it a little ooh la la. And it plays off the colors on the background. Okay, so I'm going to glue those accents down. I'm going to use my quick stick tool, grab it out of my handy dandy bag, and I'm going to use some multimedia matte. I usually use these embellishments to go in shaker cards, so I'm going to try this for the first time to use this Ranger Media Matte that I use for my paper. If it doesn't work, I'll get some glossy accent and use it as an adhesive. So this tool is great for picking up things. If you work with jewels or jewelry or card details, it has a sticky end on it right here. And you just use it to pick up stuff. So I'm gonna get some glue off of here, stick to the back of that, put it down, and that's how this works. Glue it, put it down. Okay. And that happens sometimes too. I'm gonna try to wing it. Of course, it didn't want to go, so I'm just gonna scoop it up and move it. All right. Now I'm gonna put those down, and there's our card. And the bottle that I'm using again is another tip I got from Christina Werner. It's a quill tip bottle I bought off Amazon. Comes with a top. Of course, it's been around a while, so the top is not attached to it any longer. But I put the media matte. I really like this adhesive. I put it in this bottle so that I can do finer detail things. Okay, so we've glued down those embellishments, and that means that this card is finished and ready to go. So this is the envelope we've made to go with it, and then we're going to bring back the card we finished earlier. Same stamp, same embossing technique, two totally different cards. I'd love to know down below in the comments which one you like best and why. So full disclosure, I was super nervous to do this video. So if you are still watching this, you have hung in there with me and I thank you for it. I know that I'll be posting, I believe, at least 2 more videos. So if you would like to be notified when those videos go up, click the subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, I wouldn't mind a thumbs up. Also, you can follow me on Instagram and Facebook. I'll put my information in the description box below. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next video.